Isn't it cute, this bag? That bag she showed off was a well-known luxury brand. I thought she couldn't afford such an expensive bag. To my shock, she said she stole it from the safe of my recently deceased father's house. However, the money she took was for something concerning her. The mother-in-law who wasted $30,000 on a brand-name bag was left alone and faced a sad old age. My name is Mary, and I'm 39 years old. I live with my husband, Jason, who is 2 years older than me, and our son, Brian, who is in the 5th grade of elementary school. We were living in an apartment until 3 years ago, but after my father-in-law passed away, we began living with my mother-in-law. Originally, at that time, the family home was supposed to be sold, and she was going to move into a senior residence. However, she expressed a desire to live with her son's family, even if only for a few years. It would be too lonely to live by myself without being able to live with Jason and the family. Hence, for her sake, my husband decided to live together, setting a time frame of 3 years. What surprised us after moving in was my mother-in-law's attitude towards money, or rather, we were stunned by how reckless she spent it. Despite being a housewife, she never managed the household expenses. She spent all the money she had immediately, so it was my father-in-law who managed the household's finances. Of course, she was never allowed to have a credit card, probably because if she had one, it was obvious she would max it out. Her daily life revolved around doing house chores with the groceries and items that her husband bought. He would give her an allowance, but she would spend it immediately. So instead of giving it to her once a month, he would give it weekly. My husband, who knew about this system from his father, decided to continue it. The responsibility of managing the household finances was given to me. My mother-in-law, who had previously been in charge of my father-in-law's living expenses, could not say anything too strongly. But now that her daughter-in-law was in charge of the living expenses, she became more aggressive. "Mary, you work part-time, right? It must be tough managing work and household chores. Let me at least do the shopping." It was obvious what she was up to, so I gently declined. "No, I'll do the shopping on my way back from work. Thank you for your concern." "Oh, so you're just going to ignore my goodwill? Then I won't help with the chores at all. You handle everything." And then she said, "By the way, I'd prefer the allowance once a month, not weekly." It was clear she would spend it all right away. So I asked, "Can I discuss with Jason first? There's no need to bother him for such a small matter. What do you all think of me? It's just an allowance." She didn't listen to me, so I ended up changing my allowance to once a month. She wanders around every day without doing any housework. At the beginning of the month, she always brought paper bags with her when she came home from shopping somewhere. By mid-month, she would come back empty-handed. I figured she'd spend all her allowance. I immediately got an idea. However, after a few days, she would return with shopping bags again. Was she getting money from somewhere else? I confronted my husband with my suspicions. "Have you been giving your mother more money?" With a guilty expression, he said. She told me she really needed money, so I gave her little from my allowance. "You know that's not good for her, right?" "I know, but she probably wants to shop to distract herself from the loneliness of losing Dad. We moved here to help her cope with that. Relying on money is not the solution. I think we should stop giving money to her from now on," I said firmly, but my husband looked reluctant. It seems like he doesn't intend to stop giving money to his mother. For 3 years, she had been leading an indescribable life. Our temporary living arrangement with the mother-in-law was coming to an end. For these 3 years, my husband had been giving her pocket money as she demanded. I wonder if she'll be okay starting to live on her own. We were approaching the time when we had to start the paperwork for her new residence, but then I received news that my father had collapsed. Currently, he lives alone in an apartment. My mother passed away when I was little, so he raised me on his own. Hearing that he had fallen, I rushed to the hospital. The diagnosis was cancer. It had already spread throughout his body, and there was nothing to be done. He had 3 months left. He wasn't interested in life-prolonging treatment and wished to spend his remaining days at home with palliative care. I want you to live even a little longer, Dad. I want you to see Brian grow up. Don't worry about the money. Please get the treatment. I begged him repeatedly, but no matter how much I pleaded, his decision remained unchanged. I have no regrets in my life. I've raised you, Mary, and I feel accomplished. Now I want to prepare to peacefully depart to join your mother. With that, he was discharged from the hospital and arranged for home nursing on his own. Eventually, I respected my father's wishes and visited him as often as possible with my son Brian. Knowing his grandfather's time was limited, Brian started taking many photos with him. I would use my smartphone to capture these moments, print them, and show them to my father. These snapshots of our daily lives grew into not just one album, but 2, then 3. My father would look through these albums every day. He said he wanted some of the photos to be placed in his coffin, but this peaceful life came to a sudden end. One day, after my part-time job, I received a phone call. It was from the hospital in charge of home care. My father's condition had deteriorated, and he had to be hospitalized. When I arrived, I could tell his end was near. I contacted my husband, asking him to bring Brian, and while waiting, I held my father's hand, praying he'd hung on. He did, passing away just as my husband and Brian arrived. Brian bursted into tears. My husband was in shock. As for me, I tried to hold back, but a tear rolled down. With my father's departure still fresh in our hearts, we immediately began the funeral preparations. My husband actively helped with my father's funeral preparations. Having faced the challenging experience of his own father's passing 3 years prior, we were able to apply those lessons to smoothly prepare for my father's funeral. Although my father didn't want a big funeral, many people who were grateful to him during his lifetime reached out, and both the wake and the funeral were well attended. I felt proud of my father. Although aware of our busy situation, my mother-in-law seemed to be enjoying her days following my father's death. After the funeral and the following memorial ceremonies, things finally started to calm down. Having been away from home for a while, my husband's family home was in disarray. Despite my mother-in-law being at home, it was clear that she hadn't done any housework. However, one corner of the living room was strangely tidy. There, even someone like me, with no interest in luxury brands, could instantly recognize several high-end brand bags. They weren't mine, of course. So they belonged to my mother-in-law? But I hadn't given her enough money to afford such luxury. Just as I was about to ask her about it, she returned home. Upon noticing me eyeing the bags, my mother-in-law said, "Aren't they lovely? I've wanted them for so long," she said gleefully. But what I really wanted to know was where she got the money for these bags. Excuse me, while the bags are indeed wonderful, where did you get the money? I don't believe I've given you nearly enough to afford them. Then, With a sly grin, she responded, "I had some unexpected income." Unexpected income? It was impossible for my mother-in-law to have such a source of income. Please be honest. Where did this unexpected income come from? I pressed her firmly. I found it when I went to your father's apartment. There was $30,000 in cash in a safe there. That's the money you're inheriting, right? I thought it's okay for mother-in-law to use her daughter-in-law's money. After all, you weren't really filial to your own father, right? So I figured I'd use the $30,000 on your behalf. Did you spend all the money? Yes, I spent it all in the blink of an eye, she replied with excitement, apparently not noticing my tone growing colder. Do you understand what that $30,000 was for? Even when I asked this, she laughed and replied, "It's the money you're inheriting from your father, but $30,000 is a rather small inheritance." I told her the truth. That money was the entrance fee for your senior citizen's apartment. What? With an incredulous expression, the mother-in-law looks at me. What do you mean? Why? Why was that money in your father's room? The mother-in-law started to panic. First of all, it's all your fault. You just spend money without thinking. Your late husband left a significant inheritance, and I don't know what you spent it on. But in the end, only this $30,000 remained. We hid it once we realized, and yet you dared to use it. Finally understanding the gravity of the situation, the mother-in-law said, "Wait a minute. So without that $30,000, where am I supposed to live? I can't continue living here with you, can I?" I answer calmly, "No, you can't. This house was deteriorated a lot. Simple renovations won't fix it." "Then what will you do with this house? Where will you and Jason live?" "We will demolish this house and sell the land. This house is in Jason's name. If he decides to do so, you have no say in it." "Then where are you two going to live?" "We've already bought our own home, so we'll be moving there." "You won't take me with you?" I was prepared for this. "We can't live with you anymore. You have debts, don't you? We will not help you pay them off." She looked startled, probably not expecting that I knew about her debts. "What? How do you know about my debts?" "We saw the reminders for payment, about $20,000 in total, right?" Her face grew pale. "Did you think we would repay it for you? Both Jason and I are tired of your reckless spending. We've decided to cut ties with you. We just wanted to help you move to the senior citizen's apartment. We are truly disappointed in you." As I said this, the mother-in-law collapsed to her knees. When my husband returned home, she immediately cried to him, but he already knew of her actions and offered no sympathy. Even Brian, our 5th grade son, had distanced himself from her, but he's on the 5th grade. He had been disliking her for a while and fully understood the situation. There was zero chance that Brian would side with his grandmother. The mother-in-law, abandoned by her son and grandson, had nothing left but the brand-name bags she bought for $30,000, shining brightly. While we were busy, our new home was completed and the moving day was approaching. My mother-in-law has not yet decided where she will live. The date to demolish the old family home hasn't been set, but it's decided that it will be torn down and sold soon. Before that, we need to get my mother-in-law to move out, but she doesn't seem to have any intention of doing so. Moreover, seeing us packing, she began packing her belongings as well. I spoke to my mother-in-law. "There's no room for you in our new house. We have no intention of living with you. Please find a place to live on your own." My mother-in-law responded, "What do you think of me? You're saying there's no room for me? Just give me your room. Take me to the new house," she said arrogantly. No matter how grandly she speaks, it won't change our minds. Did you think yelling would change our feelings? Maybe you should think about your debts. You've been receiving a lot of collection notices, right? If debt collectors come to this house, we'll leave immediately. My mother-in-law always falls silent when her debt is brought up. We think that if she sells the luxury bag she bought for $30,000, she could repay her $20,000 debt, but she won't. Her actions are mysterious. Eventually, my husband decided to rent an apartment for her. It's not a senior residence, but a cheap, cramped, run-down apartment. My husband moved her belongings there, forcing her to live there. How can you make your mother live in such a place? What kind of son are you? At the start of her move, she was quickly reprimanded by the landlord for being too noisy. Her reckless spending didn't change. When her pension came in, she'd spend 2 months' worth in about a week. She would borrow money for living expenses, and when that runs out, borrow again. Her debt snowballed to $30,000. At this rate, she might be evicted from the apartment. To avoid her debt problems affecting us, my husband formally cut ties with her. We didn't share our new address with her and changed our phone number. I once asked my husband, "Are you okay with what happened to your mother?" He firmly replied, "Someone who thinks they can just use your inheritance and casually spend $30,000 is not a parent to me." He had no regrets. Later, my mother-in-law finally sold her luxury bag and managed to repay some of her debt. Though she receives a pension, she had to start working to repay her debt and for living expenses. Working was a new world for her, who had been a housewife most of her life. We heard she's being yelled at by young supervisors daily, but continues to work for money. As for us, we began our new life in our new home as planned. Our son Brian is delighted every day in our new beautiful house. The old family home was sold without issues after being demolished. We plan to save the money from the sale for Brian's education. After enduring 3 years living with my mother-in-law, we hope for a peaceful life as a family of 3.